Chaos reigns in what could be the worst school shooting in the nation's history.
He came into the library and shot everybody around me, then put a gun to my head and asked if we all wanted to die.
Gunmen in trench coats and masks storm a suburban Colorado high school, spraying gunfire, sending frantic students running for their lives.
We ran into houses wherever we could go. We just went into any houses we could find.
Terrified parents wait for word. SWAT teams swarm the school, looking for the living, finding the dead. Even the president seemed at a loss.
Perhaps we may never fully understand it. St. Paul reminds us that we all see things in this life through a glass darkly.
Tonight, the latest on the tragedy in Colorado. Should we have seen it coming? Can we stop it from happening again?
On April 20th, 1999, the Columbine High School shooting in Littleton, Colorado, shocked the nation and changed how people discuss school shootings and youth violence. Two students, 18-year-old Eric Harris and 17-year-old Dylan Klebold, executed a pre-planned attack that lasted 49 minutes, killing 12 students and one teacher, while injuring over 20 others before taking their own lives. Though initially blamed on influences like video games, music, and bullying, investigations revealed the attack was the result of deeper personal issues, including mental health struggles and a desire for notoriety. The Columbine shooting reshaped school safety and became the blueprint for several future copycat mass shootings. Dylan Bennett Klebold was born on September 11, 1981, in Lakewood, Colorado, to Thomas and Susan Klebold. His parents raised him in a relatively privileged, middle-class environment in the suburban neighborhood of Littleton, Colorado. Tom Klebold was a geophysicist working in the oil industry, and Sue worked closely with children with disabilities as part of her career in education. The Klebold family was known for their commitment to open-mindedness, social awareness, and empathy toward others. While the family wasn't deeply religious, they occasionally observed Jewish holidays, reflecting Sue's cultural background. Dylan grew up with an older brother named Byron, with whom he reportedly had a good relationship. His parents described Dylan as a thoughtful and sensitive child who preferred introspection and calm environments. He was known to be intelligent and showed signs of early academic success. From a young age, Dylan was identified as gifted, prompting his enrollment in the CHIPS program, a school program for exceptionally bright students. Throughout elementary school, Dylan performed well academically, though his teachers noted that he tended to be shy and socially reserved. Classmates described him as polite and soft-spoken, though his introverted nature made it difficult for him to connect deeply with peers. His parents were aware of his quiet demeanor, but they were not concerned, believing it to be part of his natural personality. Dylan also participated in organized sports, including baseball and soccer, though he was not known to be very competitive. As Dylan grew older, his shyness became more pronounced, contributing to feelings of isolation that would gradually deepen over time. After completing elementary school, Dylan transitioned to Ken Carroll Middle School, where his social struggles became more apparent. He found it increasingly difficult to form close friendships and often felt like an outsider among his peers. Eric Harris, a fellow student, became one of the few people Dylan connected with. While Dylan had known other kids from elementary school, his bond with Eric marked a turning point. Although Dylan's academic performance remained solid during middle school, he began to feel disconnected from the world around him. Teachers described him as a student who had potential but lacked confidence, a kid who could do well but often seemed indifferent or overwhelmed. His shy nature prevented him from seeking out friendships or engaging fully with his classmates, leaving him feeling socially isolated. Dylan's journals, discovered after the tragedy, reveal that even during these years, he was beginning to grapple with deep emotional pain. He wrote about feeling worthless and disconnected, struggling with what seemed to be undiagnosed depression and suicidal thoughts. At home, his parents didn't initially notice the extent of his emotional distress. Sue Klebold would later express regret, saying that Dylan had hidden his pain well and rarely sought help or expressed his struggles openly. While Dylan occasionally confided in his journals, he never communicated these thoughts to his family or friends. When Dylan enrolled at Columbine High School, his emotional struggles became more pronounced. Dylan joined the school's theater crew, helping with technical aspects like lighting and set design, but he never fully integrated into the group. Though he had brief interactions with other students, deep friendships remained rare, with Eric Harris being one of the few people Dylan consistently spent time with. Dylan's journals reveal that he fantasized about escaping his life, either through death or through imagined scenarios where he could live out his dreams without fear or rejection. He expressed feelings of being fundamentally broken and unlovable, believing that no one could truly understand him. His writing alternated between hopelessness and violent thoughts. Dylan and Eric began spending most of their free time together. Their personalities seemed to complement each other in a toxic way. Eric was outwardly confident, manipulative, and angry, while Dylan was introverted and prone to depression. Dylan struggled with deep feelings of self-hatred and inadequacy, while Eric's anger was directed outward. Eric's desire for revenge against those he saw as enemies fueled their violent plans and fantasies. Together, Dylan and Eric became more isolated from other students, finding peace in each other's company and reinforcing each other's negative thoughts. They bonded over their mutual hatred for jocks and what they saw as the superficial culture of Columbine High School. They also shared a fascination with violence, frequently playing first-person shooter games like Doom and creating disturbing writings and videos in which they discussed their fantasies of death and destruction. Eric David Harris was born on April 9, 1981, in Wichita, Kansas, to Wayne and Catherine Harris. His father served as a U.S. Air Force transport pilot, and the demands of military life required the family to move frequently. This lifestyle saw Eric living in Ohio, Michigan, and New York, before finally settling in Littleton, Colorado in 1993, when Wayne retired from the military. According to accounts from friends and acquaintances, Eric disliked the instability of his upbringing. The constant relocations forced him to repeatedly leave behind friends and familiar settings, which fostered a sense of displacement and frustration. Eric's journals and later behaviors suggest that these early experiences played a crucial role in the development of his resentment toward others and the world at large. Eric's struggles with adjustment became apparent in his early school years, where bullying and social rejection began to take a toll on him. He was often described as someone who was outgoing and friendly on the surface, but manipulative and cold underneath. Eric could appear charming, but those close to him saw anger beneath the surface, often erupting when things didn't go his way. Eric met Dylan Klebold at Ken Carroll Middle School. While Eric's confidence helped him connect with others, he struggled to keep friendships and grew frustrated with the cliques and social dynamics of teenage life. He became obsessed with the idea that others didn't see his intelligence or potential. His journals discovered after the attack revealed fantasies about power, control, and revenge. By the time Eric and Dylan started at Columbine High School, their friendship was firmly established, and they began distancing themselves from other students. Eric developed a deep hatred for the popular jocks, seeing them as symbols of everything wrong with the school's social order. His writings became more delusional, portraying himself as a genius surrounded by fools. While Eric displayed an inflated sense of superiority, his journals also revealed intense self-hatred. He often wrote about his desire for death, but was determined to cause as much pain and destruction as possible before ending his life. Eric developed a fascination with violent video games, most notably Doom and Quake. In these games, players assume the role of a heavily armed soldier, mowing down hordes of enemies, fantasies that seem to align with Eric's increasingly violent daydreams. Eric was an avid computer gamer and programmer, and he often modified Doom levels to reflect his personal interests, creating virtual environments where he could simulate acts of violence. According to his journal entries, these games provided not just an outlet for his anger, but a way to visualize his fantasies of power and domination. Eric also developed an interest in Nazi ideology. This fixation began as a way to shock and provoke others. However, over time, it became a more serious symbolic attachment to ideas of power, superiority, and dominance. Both Eric and Dylan frequently used the Nazi salute in private as a form of dark humor, but Eric's journal entries also reveal expressions of hatred toward various ethnic groups and a fascination with Hitler and the Third Reich. During high school, Eric's hatred for the world grew deeper, and he began to fantasize about mass murder. He filled his journals with elaborate plans for destruction, describing his desire to hurt and kill as many people as possible before ending his own life. He wanted to inflict as much suffering as possible on others, believing that humanity deserved punishment for what he saw as its stupidity and hypocrisy. As part of their high school coursework, both Dylan and Eric wrote essays and short stories that reflected increasingly violent and disturbing themes. In one of his assignments, Eric wrote a story about a character who murders students in a school setting. Dylan also submitted a story titled The Mind and Motives of Charles Manson, which explored the cult leader's dark ideology. Despite the graphic nature of their work, teachers dismissed the stories as typical teenage attempts to shock. Dylan and Eric also created videos, sometimes known as the basement tapes, where they discussed their plans for the attack and their hatred toward society. In these videos, Eric can be seen laughing and taunting future victims, while Dylan expresses a desire to be remembered after his death. In 1998, Dylan and Eric were arrested for breaking into a van and stealing electronics and other equipment. This incident led to their enrollment in a juvenile diversion program, an intervention designed to keep them out of the criminal justice system. Both boys cooperated with the program, displaying politeness and outward remorse during counseling sessions. However, this compliance was entirely superficial. In reality, both Eric and Dylan were using the program as a way to avoid serious consequences. Their journals written during this time reveal that their hatred for society and desire for revenge were only intensifying. Eric, in particular, became increasingly obsessed with violence and bomb making, carefully researching how to build explosives that would later be used in the attack. After completing the diversion program, Dylan and Eric appeared to be on a better path, but the truth was far darker. They frequently discussed plans to commit mass murder, referring to the attack as their Judgment Day. The two boys acquired guns through an older friend, Robin Anderson, who bought them shotguns and a rifle at a gun show. They also collected propane tanks, intending to use them as bombs in the school cafeteria. In the months and weeks leading up to April 20th, 1999, Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris meticulously planned every aspect of the Columbine High School massacre. Their goal was not simply to commit a mass shooting, but to execute a large-scale bombing attack that would kill hundreds, rivaling the Oklahoma City bombing. They acquired 2 sawed-off shotguns, a 9mm high-point carbine, and a 9mm Intratec Tech-9 pistol. Klebold and Harris also obtained knives, homemade bombs, and nearly 100 explosive devices, including pipe bombs, Molotov cocktails, and propane bombs. They believed the propane bombs, which they planned to detonate in the school's cafeteria, would be the most devastating aspect of their attack. Eric Harris journaled about his experiments with small bombs in the months leading up to the attack, testing their power in local parks. Some of these bombs were designed to act as diversions, drawing police and rescue teams away from the school. They also constructed timers to ensure the bombs would detonate at precise moments, killing the maximum number of students. Despite red flags from teachers and counselors, the pair avoided suspicion in their final days. They continued attending school, appearing cooperative in class, and finishing assignments to avoid raising suspicion. The boys originally considered attacking on April 19th, the anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, but they ultimately chose April 20th, Adolf Hitler's birthday. On the morning of the attack, Dylan and Eric dressed in trench coats over their cargo pants and t-shirts. Eric's read Natural Selection, and Dylan's read the word Wrath. They loaded their cars with extra ammunition and bombs. Their plan was to plant the propane bombs in the cafeteria during lunch, giving them time to escape the blast and ambush survivors fleeing the explosion. The boys drove separately to Columbine High School that morning, parking in strategic positions to create choke points and prevent escape. Brooks Brown stepped outside Columbine High School for a cigarette and saw Eric Harris pull into the parking lot. Brooks confronted Eric about missing a scheduled test during third period. Eric shrugged it off, replying, "It doesn't matter anymore." He then gave Brooks an eerie warning. "Brooks, I like you now. Get out of here. Go home. Now." Eric resumed unloading duffel bags from his car as Brooks, sensing something was off, left the school. At 11:14 a.m., Harris and Dylan Klebold entered the cafeteria, carrying duffel bags that contained 2 20-pound propane bombs set to explode at 11:17 a.m. during a lunch, when nearly 500 students crowded the space. Had the bombs detonated, the blast would have killed hundreds and caused the library above to collapse into the cafeteria. However, the bombs failed to ignite due to faulty wiring. Shortly before the boys planted the bombs, a janitor rewound the surveillance tape, missing the moment the bags were left near 2 tables. After planting the bombs, Harris and Klebold returned to their cars to wait for the explosion. When the bombs failed to detonate, the gunmen decided to begin the attack. At 11:19 a.m., They climbed the hill near the west entrance, taking a position at the top of the outdoor stairs. The cafeteria and library were below, and the athletic fields were to their right. Their first victims were Rachel Scott and Richard Castaldo, who were sitting on the grassy area between the shooters and the west entrance. Richard was hit 8 times and survived, but his spinal injuries left him paralyzed. Rachel Scott was shot 4 times, including a fatal wound to the head from Eric's 9mm rifle. After taking off his trench coat and reloading his weapon, Harris and Klebold targeted more students. Lance Kirkland, Danny Rohrbaugh, and Sean Graves, who had just left the cafeteria to head to Smoker's Pit at a nearby park, were climbing the stairs when they saw the gunman. Assuming it was a senior prank, they kept walking up. Without warning, the gunman opened fire. Lance was hit multiple times, including in the chest and leg. Danny Rohrbaugh was shot in the chest and fell onto Sean Graves. As Lance tried to escape, he was hit again, causing him to collapse. Sean managed to run a few steps, but was shot in the back, abdomen, and leg before falling just outside the cafeteria entrance. 5 students who had been seated to the west of the stairs became targets as they scrambled for safety. 15-year-old Michael Johnson was shot but managed to reach the outdoor athletic storage shed, where he sought refuge with 3 other uninjured students who had already arrived. Mark Taylor was critically injured and fell to the ground. Unable to escape, he pretended to be dead, hoping it would keep him safe. Meanwhile, Anne-Marie Hochhalter, who had been having lunch with friends, attempted to flee towards the cafeteria for safety, but was struck by a bullet fired by Harris, leaving her paralyzed and causing her to collapse. The gunman also tried to target individuals near the soccer fields a short distance away, but failed to hit anyone. They went on to light and toss homemade pipe bombs onto the school roof, directing some toward the grassy hill and others down into the parking lot. Sean Graves managed to crawl towards the cafeteria door, but due to blood loss, he could not fully make it inside. In a desperate attempt to survive, he smeared blood on his face and pretended to be dead. At this point, Dylan made his way down the stairs, where he shot Daniel Rohrbaugh at close range, killing him instantly. He then turned his gun on Lance Kirkland, shooting him point blank in the face with a shotgun. The blast severely injured Lance, mangling his jaw and causing him to lose consciousness. Despite being left for dead, Lance remarkably survived his injuries. After this, Dylan moved toward the cafeteria entrance, stepping over Sean Graves as he briefly entered at 11:21 a.m. At 11:22 a.m., the school custodian restarted the cafeteria's surveillance camera, capturing students beginning to notice the commotion occurring outside. Some students rushed to the large front windows to get a better view of the unfolding situation. Among those present was 18-year-old senior Nicholas Foss. While many students fled in fear, Nick chose to run outside to see what was happening. As he did, he felt a shot graze his head, prompting him to duck back inside and sprint toward the teacher's lounge. Inside the lounge, he was joined by his friend Tim Castle, 3 female teachers, a female cook, and another male student. The group squeezed into a private bathroom connected to the teacher's lounge, where they would remain hidden for the next 45 minutes. Patricia Nielsen, who was serving as a hall monitor, heard the commotion outside and looked out the west entrance. She spotted a male student carrying what she initially believed to be a toy gun, assuming that a school video production was taking place or that it was merely a prank. Brian Anderson had been instructed by another teacher to leave the school due to the noise and explosions. Unaware of the actual danger, he exited through the first door he encountered, the west entrance. Upon entering the first set of doors, he saw Eric Harris outside the second set of double doors and assumed, since Eric was supposed to be in film class, that the gun he was holding was a prop. Just behind Brian, Patty followed closely. As Eric noticed them approaching, he opened fire, shattering the glass doors that separated them. Shards of glass and metal fragments flew into the corridor, injuring Patty in the shoulder, forearm, and knee, while Brian was struck in the chest. Terrified and in shock from the realization that she had been shot, Patty Nielsen turned and ran toward the library, while Brian Anderson stumbled out of the west entrance. Following Patty, Brian made it to the library, where he quickly hid inside a utility closet. Eric and Dylan entered the school through the same west entrance where Eric had just opened fire. Their plans were momentarily disrupted by the arrival of Deputy Neil Gardner, the school resource officer, who was the first law enforcement officer on the scene. Gardner decided to park in the senior lot, as it offered a clear view of the school grounds. Unfortunately, this lot was located near the west entrance, where the gunmen had positioned themselves. As Gardner exited his vehicle, Eric spotted him and opened fire, shooting roughly 10 rounds from the west entrance. However, Eric's weapon jammed, preventing him from continuing the assault on Gardner. Deputy Gardner responded swiftly, firing 4 rounds at Eric Harris in an attempt to neutralize him. For a brief moment, Gardner thought one of his shots might have hit Harris, as Eric suddenly jerked sharply to the right. However, Harris hadn't been struck. He was merely clearing a jam in his weapon. Once the jam was fixed, Harris resumed firing at the deputy. 2 nearby vehicles Gardner had parked behind were hit, each taking 2 bullets. Harris retreated through the shattered west entrance, disappearing back into the school to continue shooting at students. Stephanie Munson and Melissa Walker had just stepped out of a tech lab classroom into the north hallway when they noticed a teacher and several students sprinting toward the school's main entrance to the east. Suddenly, Dylan Klebold opened fire with his Tech 9, sending a hail of bullets in their direction. The 2 girls quickly followed the fleeing group, racing toward the east exit in a desperate bid for safety. As they reached the exit, Stephanie was struck in her ankle by a bullet. Both girls managed to escape the building and made their way to Leawood Park, located just across the street from the school. After evacuating the cafeteria, Coach Sanders headed up the stairs where he passed the library, motioning to Peggy Dodd that she and the others should stay put. Seeing Eric and Dylan ahead in the hall, Coach Dave Sanders turned and went back the way he'd come, but he was shot in the neck by Eric just before making it around the corner. Eric and Dylan then paced the library hallway for nearly 3 minutes, firing their weapons and throwing pipe bombs. They threw 2 pipe bombs over the stairway rail into the cafeteria, the explosions of which can be seen on the cafeteria surveillance camera. At 11:29 a.m., Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold entered the library, hollering for everyone in the room to get up. When no one stood up, Eric and Dylan proceeded through the library toward the west windows and continued shooting. 16-year-old Kyle Vasquez, who had suffered a stroke as an infant and was mentally handicapped, was sitting at the computer table in the north row when Dylan shot him. Kyle took a shotgun blast in the back of the head and died immediately. The shooters placed their backpacks, loaded with ammunition and Molotov cocktails, on the southern computer table. After reloading, they advanced between the north and south computer tables toward the west-facing windows. Eric knelt on one knee and began firing out of the shattered west library windows at law enforcement officers who were evacuating students outside. Dylan also knelt nearby, joining Harris in firing through the broken glass. At one point, Dylan took off his coat and discarded it on the floor. He then fired his shotgun at a nearby table, injuring 3 students, Patrick Ireland, Daniel Steepleton, and Mackay Hall. Outside, officers returned fire toward the library, but couldn't get a clear shot at either gunman. Fortunately, Eric and Dylan were also unsuccessful in hitting their intended targets outside the school. Eric Harris stepped away from the windows and fired at a nearby table to the north. His first shot struck and killed Steve Curnow, who had been hiding under the farthest desk. His second shot wounded Casey Rugseger, injuring her as she took cover under the same table. Eric Harris moved south and spotted 2 girls hiding under a nearby table. He tapped the table twice, leaned down, and said peekaboo before shooting and killing Cassie Bernal. The shotgun's recoil hit Harris in the face, breaking his nose. Pat Ireland tried to assist Mackay Hall by administering first aid. When Dylan noticed Pat, he shot him twice in the head and once in the foot as Pat attempted to crawl back under cover. The blast knocked off one of Pat's shoes, and he fell unconscious. To avoid further attacks, Mackay Hall and Dan Steepleton played dead. Bree Pasquale crouched nearby in the open, unable to find a place to hide. When Harris noticed her, he pointed his gun at her and asked if she wanted to die. Bree pleaded, "No, please don't shoot me. I have a family and a fiancé." Harris laughed and coldly responded, "Everyone's gonna die. We're gonna blow up the school anyway." Before he could act further, Dylan redirected his attention toward 2 boys under another table, diverting Harris and sparing Bree. The encounter left her so traumatized that she was unable to sleep for 4 days. At another set of tables, 3 friends, Matthew Kechter, Isaiah Schules, and Craig Scott, hid together. The shooters positioned themselves on opposite sides of the table. Witnesses heard Isaiah express his fear, saying he just wanted to go home to see his mom. Dylan made a racial slur directed at Isaiah and tried to drag him out from under the table. When he failed to pull him out, Eric fired, killing Isaiah. Dylan followed Eric's lead, firing under his side of the table and killing Matt Kechter. Miraculously, Craig Scott remained unharmed, forced to lie still in his friend's blood while pretending to be dead. Eric then threw a homemade CO2 bomb under the table where Mackay Hall, Daniel Steepleton, and Pat Ireland were hiding. The bomb landed on Dan's thigh, but he was too terrified to move despite seeing it was lit. Mackay grabbed the bomb and threw it farther south, away from the table. It exploded midair, without injuring anyone. Dylan crossed to the east side of the library, shooting out the glass of a nearby trophy case. He then fired beneath another table, wounding Mark Kintkin in the head and shoulder. Turning toward a different group of students, he fired again, striking both Lisa Kreutz and Valine Schnurr with the same bullet. He followed up with a burst of shots, killing Lauren Townsend, who had been beside Valine. Dylan rejoined Eric, who approached a table where two girls were hiding. He bent down, looked at them, and dismissively called them pathetic. While one of the gunmen reloaded, they asked Valine Schnurr if she believed in God. In her panic, Valine first answered no, then changed to yes, hoping to say the right thing. When the shooter pressed her for a reason, she said it was what her family believed, then crawled back under the table and pretended to be dead. Eric continued to another table, where he shot Nicole Nolan and John Tomlin. John tried to crawl away, but Dylan shot and killed him. Eric circled back to the table, where Lauren Townsend lay dead. Kelly Fleming, who couldn't find room under the table, was hiding behind it. Eric shot her in the back, killing her instantly. He fired once more under the table, hitting Lauren again, and wounding both Lisa Kreutz and Gina Park. The shooters advanced to the center of the library, reloading their weapons at a table halfway across the room. Eric spotted a student hiding under a nearby table and recognized him. He ordered the student to identify himself, and with Dylan pointing a gun at his head, John Savage complied. When John asked Dylan what he was doing, Klebold casually responded, "Oh, just killing people." Concerned for his life, John asked if he would be killed too, to which Dylan told him to leave the library. John quickly exited through the main entrance. Eric then fired at a table directly north of their position, shooting Daniel Mauser in the face at close range, resulting in his death. The gunman then moved south to another table where Jennifer Doyle, Stephen Austin Eubanks, and Corey DePuter were hiding. Both gunmen opened fire, injuring Jennifer and Austin while killing Corey. They proceeded toward the administration desk, with Eric throwing a Molotov cocktail toward the southwestern end of the library. As Eric rounded the east side of the counter, Dylan joined him from the west, converging near Evan Todd, who had moved there after being injured. Dylan taunted Evan and discussed killing him, but ultimately did not. Eric then suggested they head down to the school's common area. Before leaving, Dylan shot into the library staff break room, hitting a television. The gunmen exited the library at 11:36 a.m., leaving a heavy silence in their wake. While the injured were moaning, and the air was filled with the sound of ringing from the explosions and blaring fire alarms, survivors later described the atmosphere as eerily quiet. The gunfire had ceased, and for a long time, no one moved, looked at each other, or spoke. Gradually, those still alive began to creep out through the northern emergency exit leading to the sidewalk where the massacre had started. They escaped individually or in small groups, filled with fear that the shooters might return to finish what they had started. Within just over 7 minutes, 10 people had been killed and 12 others wounded. Of the 56 individuals in the library, 34 managed to escape injury. Despite having ample ammunition to kill everyone, for some reason, the shooters did not. From the library, Dylan and Eric made their way back down the hall toward the science area. They peered through the windows of several locked classrooms and even made eye contact with some students, but they didn't attempt to break into any rooms. Witnesses noted that Eric and Dylan did not seem overly determined to access those classrooms. They could have easily shot the locks or fired through the windows, but chose not to. Their behavior appeared aimless at this point. At 11:38 a.m., they threw several more pipe bombs down into the cafeteria below and arrived there at 11:44 a.m. Eric paused on the stairs, kneeling to fire several shots with his carbine at a duffel bag containing one of the 20-pound propane bombs. Despite the cafeteria being cluttered with countless backpacks, he aimed precisely at the right one, but it failed to detonate. After Eric's unsuccessful attempts, Dylan approached the same bag and tampered with something on the floor, but nothing happened again. A witness hiding in the cafeteria heard one of the gunmen declare, "Today, the world's going to come to an end. Today's the day we die." The boys consumed some water from the bottles left behind by other students. Surveillance footage from the cafeteria showed Klebold lighting something, potentially a CO2 cartridge or pipe bomb, and throwing it at the bomb. Smaller containers of flammable liquids attached to the bomb ignited from whatever Dylan threw, starting a fire as the shooters went back upstairs at 11:46 a.m. They moved toward the main office area, where an unarmed security guard and a secretary were hiding and making lengthy calls to 911. Outside, the Denver SWAT team arrived on the east side of Columbine. 3 minutes later, Jefferson County Undersheriff John Dunaway arrived at the command post established by the police and authorized the SWAT team to enter the school. At 11:53 a.m., Eric and Dylan transitioned from the offices to the art hall, firing their weapons into the ceiling as they proceeded. They returned to the cafeteria at 11:56 a.m., appearing defeated on security cameras, as their bombs had not exploded, and the sprinkler system had extinguished the fire they had managed to ignite. The gunmen returned to the library, shooting out the broken west windows at emergency responders and law enforcement, attempting to evacuate people and assist the wounded escaping the school. The Denver SWAT team finally began their approach to the building, using a commandeered fire truck for cover. Officers returned fire to protect those executing rescue efforts, while SWAT members observed the situation unfold from nearby rooftops. Once ambulances departed with 3 injured students, the gunfire from the library ceased. At that moment, the only survivors remaining in the library were Patrick Ireland, Lisa Kreutz, and 4 faculty members hiding in the break and video rooms, including Patty Nielsen. Due to the noise of the cover fire from law enforcement outside, none of the survivors could determine when exactly Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold took their own lives, but after 12:05, no shots attributed to the shooters were fired. Investigators believe they committed suicide shortly after opening fire on the rescue workers below. At 12:06 p.m., the first SWAT team entered Columbine High School through the southeast entrance. Shortly after, a smoke alarm in the library was triggered by a small fire caused by a Molotov cocktail set by one of the shooters. The fire did not explode, but released enough heat to break the glass of the bottle. By 12:11 p.m., a repairman on the roof was evacuated, followed by the rescue of injured students, including Lance Kirkland at 12:21 p.m. and Mark Taylor. The SWAT team was cautious about potential booby traps as they rescued approximately 20 students hiding in various locations, including the cafeteria, where the situation was chaotic with deep water from the sprinkler system. The SWAT team eventually commandeered a front-end loader for entry. They continued to find students hiding in fear, many mistaking the SWAT officers for the shooters due to their similar uniforms. Around 2:30 p.m., the SWAT team finally reached Coach Dave Sanders, who had been shot and was waiting for medical help. Tragically, he died from blood loss shortly after. By 3:25 p.m., the SWAT team entered the library and discovered the bodies of the shooters. At 4:30 p.m., Columbine High School was officially declared safe. However, additional officers were called in at 5:30 p.m. when explosives were discovered in the parking lot. By 6:15 p.m., the bomb squad found a live bomb in Dylan Klebold's vehicle, prompting the sheriff to declare the entire school a crime scene and cordon it off with police tape, leaving all the deceased inside. The bodies could not be moved until a complete investigation was conducted. Later, at 10:45 p.m., a car bomb detonated, while officials attempted to defuse it, causing damage to the BMW, but fortunately resulting in no injuries. The Columbine shooting was intended as a terrorist attack aiming for the most deaths in U.S. history, but the true motive remains unclear. In a report dated May 15th, Sheriff John Stone and Undersheriff John A. Dunaway expressed their inability to answer the fundamental question of why the attack occurred. Following the incident, media speculation was rampant, presenting various unverified motives, including claims of bullying, influences from goth culture, video games, and even musicians like Marilyn Manson. Other local rumors suggested the shooters were bullied for being homosexual, though these were largely unfounded. The FBI ultimately determined that the perpetrators had mental health issues, identifying Harris as a clinical psychopath and Klebold as suffering from depression. The shooting had a major impact on school safety and gun violence in the United States and led to an alarming number of copycat incidents. Since the attack, over 74 reported cases of copycat shootings have been reported, with 21 resulting in actual attacks. Some of the most notable being the 2007 Virginia Tech shooting, 2012 Sandy Hook shooting, and 2018 Parkland shooting, all of which involved the shooters using similar tactics as the Columbine shooting.